Okay, today, March 31st, 2021, we will be covering starting the project, part 4. And within that, we'll be discussing three process groups, actually three process areas: plan and manage quality of products and deliverables, integrate project planning activities, plan and manage procurement. All projects must be of a certain quality. You know that, I know that, and especially the customer knows that. What that level of quality is, the expectations around the quality, how the project's quality is to be measured, how it will be aligned to the project's objective, and how the quality is to be tracked and reported are just a few important aspects of managing project quality. There's a lot to do in this segment, and consider when it comes to assuring and delivering quality deliverables and products, this section here will be placing most emphasis on how we plan and manage quality of products and the deliverables. The lesson objectives will include plan and manage the quality of products and deliverables, integrate project planning activities, and plan and manage procurement strategy. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and get started with topic E, plan and manage quality of products and deliverables. Now, some of the enablers that are closely linked to this particular topic includes the planning of quality standard required for project deliverables, recommend options for improvement based on quality gaps, and continually survey project deliverable for its quality. These enablers is what will allow you to be successful in managing and planning out the quality of products and deliverables. Let me share with you a few of what those deliverables would entail. A quality management plan, define quality metrics, quality assurance, quality control. Can everyone please mute their lines? Thank you. Some of the tools that you would be exposed to include cost-benefit analysis, cost of quality, benchmarking, quality audit, process analysis, measure quality, validate deliverables, and quality measurement tools. You know, quality is really the degree to which a set of inherent characteristics fulfills the requirements. Remember that quality is going to represent what the stakeholders expect from the project. The stated and implied quality needs are inputs for devising project requirements. And in business, quality should be feasible, modifiable, and measurable. The quality standards that need to be met must be managed throughout the life of the project. Don't forget that. Quality is a component that must be managed throughout the life of the project. At the beginning of the project, you should plan quality policies and procedures that can then be managed and controlled throughout the project using the organization's quality management system. If we take a look at what we have here as defined by PMBOK, the PMBOK guidelines, is that quality standards and regulations tend to have certain elements that can immediately bring to light that a quality by some means or measure is going to need to be measured. But before we can even measure it, we need to be able to understand what are the elements or what are those requirements, characteristics, if you will, that's going to help us to be able to measure whether we're doing good, bad, or indifferent. A standard is a document established by an authority, custom, or general consent as a model, or, for example, it could be standards that are typically voluntary guidelines or characteristics that have been approved by a recognized body of experts, such as the International Organization for Standards, ISO. In some cases, the standards body will provide certification that suppliers conform to the requirements of their standards. And often the conformance to standards is a customer requirement. Another area for which the project quality may be affected could be under regulations. Regulations are requirements imposed by a governmental body, and these requirements can establish product, process, or service characteristics, including applicable administrative provisions that have government mandated compliances. Standards often start out as accepted, or also referred to as de facto best practices, which is describing a preferred approach. And then later, those particular standards may become what is referenced as de jure regulations, such as using the critical path method in scheduling major construction projects. So keep these four, or if you will, 5 definitions in mind. The ISO 9000 series is one in which it represents a quality system standard that can be applied to any product, service, or process in the world. So as you're beginning to develop your quality management plan, one thing that will become critical is to ensure that your quality management plan addresses the degree to which a set of inherited characteristics fulfills the requirements. Deliverables. Validated deliverables is constituted by products and other outputs that are measured against the quality standards set by the project. Their quality is assured throughout the project, and that's per the tools, the methods, the timing, all which has been defined within that quality management plan. When the quality standards are neither met or they're not within the acceptable ranges, corrections and controls are put into action. Whether those deliverables are controlled or within standards throughout the validation performed by the project team and then verified by the customer or the business equals validated deliverables. All project deliverables must be validated based on the quality standards or acceptance criteria. Let me give you a quick example of what a quality plan may look like. I'm going to zoom in on this. And you noticed here with this quality management plan, this is for the Andrews Family House Project. Here they've defined, they're outlining 4 areas. The introduction, which is pretty much going to give you an idea of what the project will entail, and that the quality management plan for this project will establish the activities, the processes, procedures, and so forth that will be used in order to ensure a quality product. Then you'll get into the quality management approach that addresses how the organization will use the quality attributes for managing the quality throughout the project's life cycle. And there's also a section where where the quality plan will discuss the quality requirements and the standards. And this is typically describes how the project team or the quality group will identify and document the quality requirements and standards. And then there's a section on quality assurance, which explains how you would define and document the process for auditing the quality requirements and the results. A quality plan, a quality management plan, is that component of the project or the program management plan that describes how applicable policies, procedures, and guidelines will be implemented to achieve that quality objective. It will also be documents, several documents, and it can also define how the project's quality requirements will be met, which is pretty much what is shown here on the spread on this particular slide. So when you think about your quality plan, do note that the quality plan is going to get the quality management plan is going to give you some guidance with regards to how you're going to go about managing quality of the products and deliverables that's expected as part of the outcome to this project. Okay. Next section, cost of quality. This refers to all costs incurred over the life of the product by investment in preventing non-conformance to the requirements, appraisal of the product or service for conformance to the requirements, and the failure to meet those requirements. So all costs that may fall into those three bucketed categories is what is defined as the cost of quality. As you can see to your left, there's a section that defines the cost of conformance, and the cost to your right, the cost of non-conformance. The cost of conformance, shown to your left, is the money that is spent during a project to avoid failures. And that includes prevention costs that build a high quality product, and appraisal costs that assess the quality. Examples of prevention costs would include training, doing things right the first time, following the documented processes, and appraisal costs include testing and inspection. Now, to your right, there's the cost of nonconformance. And this is the money that is spent after a project is complete because of failures, and it includes internal and external failure costs. Internal failures found during the project would include rework, scrap. External failures found by the customer could include liabilities, the warranty work, loss of business due to poor quality. It is important to recognize the two distinct areas for which cost associated with quality can occur. So make a note to be comfortable in recognizing the differences between the cost of conformance versus the cost of nonconformance. Quality metrics. A description of a project or product attribute and how to measure it. You know, the tolerance in the allowable variation in this particular metric is one that is typically defined by the customer. So for example, a quality metric on the schedule could say that the schedule is to stay within plus or minus 10% of the actual schedule. And this is determined as a result of you as the project manager working with your client, working with the stakeholders, and getting a sense of what can be accomplished within a certain period of time. But what's important is that that quality metric is one by which the customer views it as being valuable. So when the measurement falls outside that range of plus or minus 10%, action needs to be taken in order to get you back into within that range. So examples of quality metrics could be budget variance, defect counts, requirements coverage, a failure rate, a mean time to repair. Tolerance, on the other hand, is the quantified description of an acceptable variation for a quality requirement. So in the example that I shared with you, the tolerance level is plus or minus 10% within the scheduled timeline. Quality audit, a structured independent process to determine if project activities comply with the organizational and the project policies, processes, and procedures. The audits could take place at scheduled or random intervals. It's up to you as the project manager to make that decision. And sometimes it may not be up to you, it may be as a result of the customer just wanting to know. But be mindful of the fact that when that does occur, the auditor may be a trained individual from within the performing organization or a qualified representative of a third party organization. Either way, during a quality audit, the quality management plan is analyzed to make sure that it's still reflective of what has been learned in the project up to this point in time, and to make sure the operational definitions are still adequate and valid in relation to the project itself. The results of a quality audit are important for the current project, and you'll soon find out that it's also important for later projects and other projects within the organization because it can help guide you in determining the best course of action to take in order to maintain a quality performance as determined or as defined by the customer. So to keep in mind that when it comes to the quality audit, its objectives can vary. But some of those objectives may be just identify the best practices that have been implemented, identifying the flaws or the deficiencies in the project processes. It could be in the form of highlighting the contributions of each quality audit in the organizations based on the organization's lesson learned library. The topics associated with a quality audit could range from the ones that are listed there: quality management policy, the collection and use of information, the analytical methods, the cost of quality, the quality process design. Now, sure enough, each one of these has its unique definition. Be mindful for the purpose of the exam to be able to recognize the differences between these particular topics of quality audits. So, for example, if by chance the exam raises the question, you as the project manager has now become responsible for evaluating or determining the most effective proportion between prevention, inspection, and the cost of repair or rework. What type of topic of a quality audit is this? Would it be more so related to analytical methods? Would it be related to cost of quality? Would it be related to quality management policy? For the purpose of the example of the question that I raised, it would be cost of quality. So think about as you go through or are given the questions on the exam, you may not necessarily need to memorize every single definition because even from basically from your current learnings or perhaps just based on what you have learned through attending this course, that you can easily be able to recognize the difference between the quality audit topic of cost of quality versus the analytical methods. The analytical methods is taken into account determining if the best analytical methods are being used consistently and how well the results are being used. And you take into account the items for audit that would be part of that audit may be based on how the analysis topics are addressed, how analysis methods are selected, what technology is used. But the bottom line is what topic of quality audit is being addressed. In what I just read off to you, it would be the analytical method. Next, as it relates to guidelines to managing your quality. Effective quality management provides confidence that the project's product or service will satisfy the relevant quality requirements and standards. And to manage the quality of your project, here are a few guidelines to take into account. Ensure that the random and or scheduled quality audits are conducted by qualified auditors. Is the data being interpreted correctly? Are the testing methods being implemented correctly? Are the operational definitions and checklists adequate and appropriate to achieving the desired final results? So whomever is conducting that audit, you want to be sure that the audit is being conducted by a qualified auditor. Another guideline to consider as you're managing quality is the use of one or more of the quality assurance tools and techniques to determine the causes of quality problems of the project's product, service, systems, or processes. And if you remember from the earlier introduction, some of those deliverables included things such as, some of those tools included things such as the cost benefit analysis or the cost of quality, the benchmarking, taking into account the quality audit topics or how we measure quality. All that takes it, these are the type of tools that should be considered as a means to being able to ensure that you're managing your quality for the product in an effective manner. Another item to consider as part of managing your quality is identifying and implementing the appropriate actions to take to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of the project team's work results, which will ultimately improve quality in the product or service. Measurement tools. There are a variety of tools available for continually surveying the quality of your product. And a few of the tools include control charts and variability, the Pareto chart, statistical sampling, and statistical sampling process. If we take a look at the control charts and the variability, the control charts are the graphs that are used to analyze and communicate the variability of a process or a project activity over time. The control charts will help show the potential capability of the process and also suggest the range of variability in the process. And that range of variability can assist a project manager in determining if the variance is caused by common or perhaps assignable sources. So let's take, for example, if you look at the control chart that I'm showing here, we have the mean, which is represented by the bar over the X. And with the bar over the X, what we're taking into account is pretty much is the area for which the process is determined to be able to meet the actual requirements over a period of time. The upper control limit, as shown there in point A, and the lower control limit, which is revealed on the second chart down here, right there, part B. When we see that, it becomes an indicator that the process mean, for some reason, is somewhat lost its sense of stability. Usually, the upper control limit is more or less 3 standard deviations above the mean, and while the lower control limit will represent 3 standard deviations below the mean. The range of variability in a process is going to help you to determine if a variance is caused by a common or assignable resource. So let's take, for example, we have actually, if we look at the first chart, the measurements that are above the UCL meaning the upper control limit that is reflected there by the dashed line. If you look at point A gives you an indication that the process is not quite stable. Any measurements that are above the UCL or below the LCL, which is the lower control limit, if you run across such a situation, this is an indication of instability in the process. A second type of instability exists when you're looking at 7, say about, 7. It's a minimum of 7, but it's 7 or more consecutive measurements that are either above or below the process mean. And if I switch over to, let's see here, let me show you what that looks like. Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay, guys, forgive me. For some reason, I can't seem to get on.
And Terry, I don't think they understood one of your last statements.
Okay.
Determining if the variance is caused by a common or what resource?
A common or, I'm sorry, common or an assignable resource.
Assignable. Thank you.
Okay. You guys, I apologize here because for some reason, okay, I can't
Hey, Terry, this is Will. Real quick as well, to follow up on that last question, sometimes they're called special causes. If it's
Yes.
a common item or a special cause, like, special cause would be weather or a holiday or something like that. So sometimes you'll hear it called that as well.
Good point. Good point. Okay, let me try this again. Now, can you tell me if you could see my screen here? Okay, so now I'm showing you a picture of a control chart for which there are 7 or more consecutive measurements, which are the measurements are captured in the red dots, and they appear either above or below the process mean. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to the deck. Okay, you guys can see okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Righty. So now we're going to go into the variable indications. And with the variable indications, one thing that you take into account is that the measurements that exceed the range between the upper and the lower control limits are considered to be an indication of instability, which I spoke of earlier. And the variability expressed is atypical for the process and may be an indication of a special source of variance.
So can I ask a quick question about that?
Absolutely.
So, but that's only, so that last sentence there, that the variability expressed there, that's only, so you got to have an excessive amount. I'm just making sure I have this clear. You have to have an excessive amount to be out of scope, out of your control limits. One little pop, 2 little pops isn't a direct link to an issue. It's just something happened that day, but we're back in control limits and we're still within scope of the project. We're good to go.
Absolutely, yes. And then you may decide that, okay, you recognize it could have been, for example, because of COVID, due to the fact that all of the manufacturing sites had closed down, then you may have discovered that there may have been an unexpected drop or an unexpected increase based on an external factor.
Okay.
And so therefore you may decide, okay, well, because of that, I understand the nature of it. I don't need to dig further, and I don't need to investigate further what the nature of the problem would have been during that time frame.
And so on the dot chart that you had showed there was 7 points. I didn't read in here, is there an established, or is that based on your experience of the project, as far as what you would start to be concerned with as far as out of the control limits, out of the scope of the project?
Okay, good question. What you want to take into account is, remember for the control chart itself, it takes into account the entire run of the process from beginning to end. Okay. So you may discover that from beginning to end, based on the slide that I'm showing now, and you notice how B, the little the indicator, the B indicator fell below the LCL. Okay.
Right.
Now, even though it fell below the LCL, there were still a number of other measurements that took place that fell below the mean. But yet that may not necessarily been an indicator for you to further investigate.
Okay.
So one thing that you may want to keep in mind is that whenever an indicator or a measurement falls completely out beyond the UCL or the LCL, that's almost like a light bulb to say, hey, you may want to take a look at this.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, my favorite. This is my favorite chart. I love Pareto chart. The Pareto chart is the one chart that it is a histogram, of course, that is used to rank causes of problems in a hierarchical format. So for those of you that are Six Sigma certified, or perhaps you are just one of those mathematical geniuses and you love to be able to visualize exactly what may be occurring within your environment that could possibly be the source of all your issues, the Pareto chart is one good way to be able to visualize where the problem may rest. The goal is to narrow down the primary causes of variances on a project and focus the energy and your efforts on tackling the most significant sources of variance. Now, with the Pareto chart, it's typically going to represent that data for that particular area. In this case, the area of discussion, let's see, we are looking at the number of complaints. And the number of complaints takes into account 5 unique categories: overpriced, small portions, noisy, food not fresh, table not clean. Now, it's very obvious that we're dealing with a restaurant here, but to take into account, the bars are going to represent the number of failures for each of the causes. And based on that, then you take into account, to your right, you notice the cumulative percentage of complaints. And that bar, the bars represent the number of failures for each cause, and approximately 72% of the total number of failures are due to causes A and B, overpriced and small portions, which more or less equates to like 320 out of 440, gives you that percentage wise. But the project team can easily see that they should focus most of their corrective action efforts on those 2 causes. Now, I don't know if whether or not this would come up, but it is possible that the founder of the Pareto chart will be expected to be known for the exam. And this is just one of those trick questions that they throw in there. But the founder of the Pareto analysis, or the Pareto chart, is Vilfredo Pareto, an Italian economics of the late 19th century, early 20th century. So just keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind. But just so that you are aware, a good thing though is that Vilfredo Pareto, is pretty easy to recognize that this particular person may have been linked to the discovery of the Pareto charts. And it can also be referred to as the 80-20 rule. That is, 80-20 rule takes into account that the general guideline with many applications in terms of controlling processes. It contends that a relatively large number of problems or defects, which is typically 80%, are commonly due to a relatively small number of causes, which is typically 20%.
Hey, Terry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So looking at the current charts, my understanding is the overprice is the most complaint, and then the table not clean is the least complaint, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so how is that related to the line charts? You know, the black line right there, go from, how do I read that?
Okay, so what you see here is that if you were to add, and unfortunately they don't have the actual total number of cases. But what this takes into account is that it looks like this is about maybe 40, let's see, about 40 or so. But what you do is you take into account the percentage, that is the cumulative percentage of the defects or the complaints that have occurred. And based on that percentage, which is to your right, if I take, you see the tip of, you see where the black line starts almost at the top of the overpriced box? You see my cursor?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm listening.
Okay, sure. So when you take into account, this may have been 40, a little bit over, maybe about 50 complaints had come in for this particular area. And then there was, for small portions, it looked like it was exactly 40%. So you take, when you do the calculation, what you're doing is taking into account the total number of complaints, and then you're dividing it by the total number of complaints that was received as a whole. And the small portions and the overpriced portions will make up a certain percentage, which will fall like right over here, because it's based on a cumulative. So let me see if I can show you. Hold on. Okay. Okay, so for this example, it is supposedly overpriced, this amount, and the small portions, and this total amount is equivalent to close to 320. These numbers are not quite right. But if you take the cumulative of these two portions here, that's going to give you close to 70%.
It's going to give you like 80, 88. Let's say that the first one overpriced for 48 complaints. Small portion was 40. That number is right around 88. Right above, the line is right at 88, right above small portions.
Right. And what you're doing is adding them both together to come up with the cumulative
Yeah, I got it.
percentage.
I got it now. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Now, the next one is the statistical sampling. And here is just a matter of choosing the part of a population of interest to actually perform the inspection. And here you're using the statistical sampling as a means to determine the characteristics of an entire population, but it's based on the actual measurement of a portion or a representative sample of that population. Ultimately, this particular technique will produce a process that does not require inspection of every single item within the population. The statistical sampling process involves dividing sampling data into two categories, attribute and variable, each of which is gathered according to sampling plans, and it helps reduce the overall quality costs when used during quality control. Now, take close note to the two categories, attribute and variable, each of which is gathered according to the sampling plan, as I noted earlier. And the use of the statistical sampling data can help reduce the overall quality. But what you want to pay close attention to is the distinction between attribute sampling and variable sampling. Attribute sampling is taking into account a number of employees participating, the number of customer complaints, the number of returned items. There is no scale. Unlike variable sampling data, it's going to take into account a measurement based on a continuous scale, such as weight, temperature, time. Be mindful of these two unique characteristics of the type of data that can be collected. The compliance to specification is rated on a continuous scale when you're dealing with variable data. And measurements can fall between an upper and a lower range. That's one way to keep in mind of what that variable sampling data is taken into account. Whereas with the attribute sampling data is giving you a specific number that exceeds a certain limit. So in essence, controlling project quality is not an easy task, but as I mentioned earlier at the start, managing quality, controlling quality is not something that you just do on a one-time basis. It's something that's going to happen throughout the life cycle of that project. And monitoring and controlling your project quality ensures that the quality complies with the relevant quality standards that was defined early on in the process. To best control your project quality, a few guidelines. Conduct your inspections to detect quality errors as project work is ongoing. Okay. Take into account the use of the Pareto diagrams to focus on corrective actions on the problems having the greatest effect on the project, on the overall quality. Use control charts to analyze and communicate the variability of a process. Identify ways to eliminate causes of unsatisfactory results. Use flowcharts to identify redundancy, missteps, or the source of quality performance problems. Initiate process adjustments by implementing corrective or preventative actions necessary to bring the quality of work results to an acceptable level. And last but not least, continue to monitor, measure, and adjust your quality throughout the project lifecycle. Okay, so just to be sure that everyone is really listening here, I thought it might be a good idea to take a moment and to get your perspective. And here's my question. For next year's Valentine's season, we're talking February 2022, your company's candy production facility is rolling out a pink chocolate panda. And there are many quality areas that the company is worried about for this new product line. Since there are so many areas where quality may be an issue, how would you determine what the quality standards are? So I'm going to open this up to volunteers first. There is no right or wrong answers, guys.
Hi, this is Alexis. I was going to say it would be establishing the quality management plan. So whatever the project team outlined in that plan would like reflect all of the standards and essentially like the measurements that the product would be held to.
Very good. Very good, Alexis. Does anybody else want to chime in? How does the product team determine what the quality standards are? And Alexis, you hit it right on the notes. You know, you refer back to the quality management plan because it outlined exactly what you would be measuring as part of quality assurance. Besides standards, what else could possibly be used besides standards?
Regulations.
I would say
Regulation.
benchmarking to see what other companies are doing.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
What about customer feedback, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely.
Conduct
You could probably
inspections
do
of the product.
I'm sorry?
You could conduct inspections of the product.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well, historical data on similar rollouts of other new projects.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, good. Next question. The project team includes quality engineers that want to include a quality check at the end of the production line to scan for foreign objects that may be in the chocolate. The scanning tool is about $3,000 to procure and install. What kind of project cost is this? Is it a cost of non-conformance, a warranty cost, a cost of conformance, or a variable cost?
Oh, that's conformance.
Non-conformance.
Okay.
Isn't that
Okay.
conformance?
I'm sorry?
I think somebody said it. I thought it was cost of conformance.
That is correct. And why is it cost of conformance?
Oh, because they failed to let's help them out here. A cost of conformance is addressing what
It's
in
the
particular?
money spent to avoid failures.
Yeah.
It's to catch
Avoid
the failures
failures.
before they go out.
Absolutely. Good job. Good job. Okay. Okay. All right. And let's see. I'm going to go ahead and cover one more question, and then we're going to take a break because we still got quite a bit of material to cover, and I don't want to shortchange you here at all. But my next question here is, the chocolate must not exceed a set size with a 3% tolerance in order to fit in the packages and for those packages to fit in the shipping container. For this quality metric, how could the project team measure conformance? I'll read them out and you let me know if this is a way that the project team can measure conformance. By cleaning the assembly line every 4 hours?
No.
Say no.
Okay, it would be no. By observing the amount of chocolate in the mold. Yeah.
No.
Yes, yes.
Yes, that is correct. By asking the customer to ship back any products too small or too large.
No.
Yeah.
Huh. By using an electronic measuring tool.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Good deal, for guys. It is now top of the hour. Let's take a 5-minute break and then we will resume with the next section on integrated project planning activities. We'll resume at 7:05.
Thanks, Sue.
Okay, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started with topic F, integrate project planning activities. As plans are being developed and updated, integration of all those plans and the components is necessary to ensure coordinated and efficient progress is achieved. And here are the enablers that's going to allow you to coordinate and efficiently progress a particular plan. Manage and rectify the ground rule violations, consolidate the project phase or plans, assess plans for dependencies, gaps, and continued business value, analyze the data collected, collect and analyze data to make informed project decisions, determine critical information requirements, and plan and manage project compliance to the business factors. Now, surprisingly though, look at here, deliverables and tools, none. You know why? Because during the integration planning, project planning activities, your whole focus is being able to have a clear perspective on the many plans that have been built, maintained, and executed throughout this project, whatever project that may be. Consolidating those plans enables the project manager and others to assess and coordinate all the various plans and activities. A holistic, integrated view ties together plans and concentrations that may be worked on by subgroups of the project team and aligns their efforts and highlights how they depend on each other. The integration management, once again, it's many, many plans that are built, maintained, and executed throughout the project. You as the project manager and others must assess and coordinate all those plans and activities. Deliver a holistic integrated view that ties plans together, aligns the efforts, and highlights how they depend on each other. An integrated view of all plans can identify and correct gaps or conflicts. And then, of course, that consolidation of the plans encapsulates the overall project plan and its intended business value. Take a look at this. The project management plan, definition according to PMBOK, the document that describes how the project will be executed, monitored, controlled, and closed. As you can see, there are several moving parts here. You got your project plan. And the project plan is that overarching plan that takes into account all the other plans that is used for the benefit of delivering that final service, product, system, process in accordance to how the project has been defined. The contents and the plans themselves, it will vary, and it's going to vary with every project. No matter how many times you will be exposed to a project or you have done a particular project, I'm sure that there has always been something unique that may have stood out from one project to another. And a project's plan is always changing and is updated and altered and tweaked and refined and controlled, and that is part of project management. And those adjustments are done based on the demands of the project itself. So let's take a look at some of the components of that project plan, of the project management plan. You have your baselines, your scope baseline, your schedule baseline, your cost baseline, your performance measurement baseline, and then you have a plethora of subsidiary plans. Scope management plan, requirements management plan, schedule management plan, cost management plan, and the list goes on. Also included as part of that component is your life cycle, the project processes, the work explanation, the agile project plan itself. The project plan tools, techniques, takes into account expert judgment and data gathering. One thing to take into account as you're going through this integration project planning activity, is that you are in constant discussion with those that are more or less the subject matter expert, who can provide you with the expert judgment associated with determining an appropriate methodology to use, or determining the customized process to meet specific project needs. Taking into account the development of technical and management details that will be used within the project management plan itself. As the project manager, you may not have every single answer from a technical aspect, but you will have access to resources who are considered to be expert judgment, who can provide you with expert judgment for the benefit of being able to have an effective project management plan to be used throughout the life cycle of your project. Your experts will help you to be able to define the level of configuration management needed. They can give you some clues or some sort of insight as to how the work should be prioritized. When you look at data gathering techniques, of course, we've talked about brainstorming, checklists, focus groups, interviews. This shouldn't be too much of a foreign language to you, but these are some of the techniques that are used during that phase of integrating project planning activities. Oh, and I don't want to forget the project management information system. An information system consisting of the tools and techniques used to gather, integrate, and disseminate the outputs of project management processes. It's going to enable you to quickly and efficiently schedule, because there are certain calculations that have already been embedded in the system so that it performs those calculations for you automatically. A good example is the Microsoft project. Configuration plan. This is another component of the project management plan that describes how to identify and account for project artifacts under configuration, control, and how to record and report changes to them. The configuration management plan details information like what work products need to be managed, how these products will be created, stored, revised, documented, archived, the processes and the authorization levels for doing so. Change management plan. A component of the project management plan that establishes the change control board, documents the extent of its authority, and describes how the change control system will be implemented. So as part of a change management plan, that plan is going to be able to provide you answers to questions such as who can propose a change, what exactly constitutes a change, what is the impact of the change on the project's objective, what steps are necessary to evaluate the change request before approving or rejecting it. When a change request is approved, what project document must be amended to record the actions necessary to affect the change. The change management plan is a sub-plan created when the project management plan is created, and in its definition of change, if the scope changes are considered changes, then that would also be included as part of that change management plan. So for all changes, including external business environment changes, the internal organizational changes that yield scope for backlog changes, it needs to be included within the change management plan and address how certain options will be evaluated and recommended. Another type of plan is the compliance management plan. This is another important aspect of planning itself because it takes into account the compliance goals and the requirements. And when we're saying compliance, we're taking into account compliance with government regulations, corporate policies, the product and project quality, the project risk. You take it into account the potential threat to compliance. You take into account the way by which we analyze the consequences of those that are non-compliant. We determine the necessary approach and action to address compliance needs. All of this is outlined within the compliance management plan. Take this into account as you're developing a project management plan. Review the project charter for the high-level boundaries of a project. So if you get questioned on the PMP exam and they say, and I think I brought this up at one point, but they ask you, you know, your supervisor has asked you to take on a new project which happens to be located in Australia, and you have no idea the content. You've been briefed about it in terms of what is expected as part of the ultimate deliverable. But at the same time, you're still a little fuzzy as to what are you really trying to accomplish for this particular project that you've been assigned. Well, when you develop a project management plan, as part of that plan, you take into account reviewing materials that have already been defined for you before you actually begin working on the project. And so as you develop that project management plan, what you want to do is step back and say, okay, what is the project charter? What is the ask that is coming from the project charter? Which is going to give you that high level view of the project. You're also going to take into account the outputs from all the processes that you have been either you will be developing or has already been developed for you, but you need to be able to understand what each output from each of the processes, what each process was going to deliver you as part of the outputs. Also taking into account reviewing the EEFs, which takes into account the industry standard, the governmental standard, PMI systems, the organizational structure, the culture, the management practices, the infrastructure, the personnel administration. You're going to review OPAs, which takes into account the standardized guidelines, work instructions, proposal evaluation criteria, performance measurement criteria, the project management plan template, the change control procedures, the use of tools and techniques such as expert judgment to tailor the process to meet the project needs, or take into account resources and the skill levels that's needed to perform the project work. As part of that development, you're going to use facilitation techniques, brainstorming, conflict resolution, problem solving. Of course, you're going to document the project plan, and you're going to review the plan components to assess ways to potentially deliver the product components and business value incrementally. So as you're going down this path of developing a project management plan, take into account that it's not just a matter of creating a plan within Microsoft Project. It involves a number of different components which may need to be developed, or you may find yourself walking into a new project and therefore you have to bring yourself up to speed of what's associated with this project, and the project management plan will help provide you with that guidance. Scrum of Scrums, a technique to operate Scrum at scale for multiple teams working on the same product, coordinating discussions of progress on their interdependencies, and focusing on how to integrate the delivery of software, especially in areas of overlap. So when I think of the Scrum of Scrums, for some reason, the first thing that comes to mind is that I imagine, remember the little football players that were maybe been in 3rd and 4th grade, and you get a chance to see them play in little small groups, but they're all trying to fight for the same goal, and that is to make a touchdown. Well, the Scrum of Scrums kind of reminds me of that. I see these multiple teams, and these teams can be a team of maybe 4 to 7 individuals, and each one of the teams, and say we're working with a team of 4, and for each team it consists of 4 to 7 individuals. They're all working to be able to deliver a common software solution for, let's say, a local banking system. And with that in mind, each team lead or each scrum master that represents each one of those smaller teams are constantly in communication with each other to ensure that what their deliverable provides gives the next team either additional resources so that they can proceed in developing their portion of the deliverable, or it could be a means of being able to remove roadblocks from that team, from that smaller team, so that the greater team can be able to implement certain codes in a faster amount of time. But the Scrum of Scrums is one area for which there is that opportunity where the project environment, where there's a multiple agile-based projects that are actually in motion simultaneously. You have your scaled agile framework, a knowledge base of integrated patterns for enterprise scale lean agile development. And the focus of SAFE is to build a useful knowledge base of scaling development work across all levels of the enterprise. And to accomplish this, organizations are not simply applying agile methodologies as the small team, the local level, but also need to think larger and in a systematic way. So in essence, when you take into account everything that has been covered up to this point, guidelines to determine critical information requirements are as follows. Review the project stakeholders identified for the project. Review and update communication needs and expectations for each stakeholder. Determine the primary points in the project that have the most touch points for stakeholders affected. Evaluate those project points for the information contained. Assess whether that information is best communicated to the stakeholders or if it's something that just needs to be addressed among the immediate project team. Examine smaller points around the primary points to assess their value to the stakeholders. Prioritize the points of information needed. I think I mentioned that one. Agree as a group or with the impacted stakeholders a cutoff line between the most business critical information and those less critical. Set those at higher priorities to be critical information requirements and review and update these requirements regularly. Okay, so let's take a stab at this. Reflecting on your project management experience, what types of project management plans have you worked with? And let's see, what kind of projects have you worked with, Angeline? Okay, Angeline, you're on mute.
Okay. You're
There
asking
we
what
go.
kind of projects that I've worked on?
Yeah. What kind of I mean, based on your experience, what type of projects have you worked on?
I've worked on project plans where new compliance training was being developed and rolled out, and I was
Okay.
responsible for the project from end to end. So gathering the resources and all of the stakeholders that needed to be engaged for the project to be successful.
Okay. Okay. All right. And Fatima, how about you? What type of project have you worked on or created? And you're on mute. I'm on mute. Okay. David, how about you? What type of projects have you worked on? And this is David Ortiz.
I have worked on projects designing the RAN network.
Okay.
In building projects for coverage inside hospitals and campuses. Yeah.
Okay. Well, no matter how small, how large, how informal, how formal a project has been, keep in mind that the project management plans can range from informal, where there's minimal information provided or documented, to one that's very formal, very thorough, very detailed oriented. Okay, so here's my question, just to see if yes.
Terry, this is Cheryl.
Hi,
and
Cheryl.
I would like to share one of the projects that we worked on, which was a routine. It's called eRoutine app.
Okay.
And it's very successful, but it really was very detailed and had to go all the way up to an SCP level. So you're right, it can be very complicated. So of course it's AT&T project management. You know how AT&T is. You put your business requirements together and then you do a financial business case and you have to submit that for approval. But we did go through the Agile and Scrum testing at the end also, every day.
So, yeah. That sounds pretty tense, especially if you had to go through the Scrum every day. Okay. All right. So let me ask this question. Which subsidiary plan deals with the closure of contracts, including those signed to bring in consultants? Which plan deals with this? Is it the scope management plan, the procurement management plan, the process improvement plan, or the communications management plan? And I will, Go ahead.
So I said procurement management plan because of the word contracts is in
Absolutely.
that description.
Yes, yes. That's right. That's that key word, contract. Good catch. The next one, the project team recognizes there are going to be a lot of changes to documents and procedures throughout the project. The importance of team members using the correct checklist, document, or file is key. Operating off the incorrect version can have a major impact. Which plan most addresses this project concern? Is it the project charter, the scope management plan, configuration management plan, or control quality? Jermaine Mayberry, can you answer that question? Which plan?
The configuration management plan.
Good job. Yes, it is. Okay, and last, we move on to our last topic, and that is you are creating a sub-plan which describes the problems that project might encounter if government standards, municipal laws, or the internal processes are not correctly followed. What plan are you working on? Is it the compliance management plan, the configuration management plan, the communication management plan, or the quality management plan? And this question goes out to Lucas. Lucas, you'll have to unmute your line and tell me which plan are you actually working on?
Guessing the compliance management plan.
Absolutely. Good job. Okay, guys, we are moving right along here. And now we are going to approach the topic of plan and manage procurement. Okay, as you execute your project, you might need to procure external resources so that you can meet your project objectives. And procuring products and services from external suppliers requires identifying suppliers, obtaining bids or proposals from them, awarding contracts based on their evaluation. All procurements for the project must be done within the specified parameters of time, cost, and quality so as to ensure that the project meets the stakeholders' requirements. Here, under this subject, the enablers to allow for such activity to be performed are defining the external resource requirements and needs, communicating the external resource requirements, manage the suppliers and the contracts, plan and manage procurement strategy, and develop a delivery solution. So under the plan and manage procurement, these are your deliverables: statement of work, procurement management plan, that should come as no surprise, the source selection criteria, select the sellers, monitor the work and changes. These are all deliverables you can expect to be provided during this phase. The tools that you are likely to run across during this period includes make or buy analysis, market research, of course, meetings and expert judgment, set up evaluation techniques and vendor conferences, negotiations, prepare agreements, monitor work deliverables, and prepare and process change requests. That's quite a bit of activity going on during this phase. The procurement strategy takes into account the acquisition of goods and services from an external organization or vendor or supplier that's going to enable your deliverables of the project. And as part of that strategy, we take into account a couple of techniques or a couple of processes. One is the make or buy analysis. This is the process of gathering and organizing data about a product requirements and analyzing them against the available alternatives. And that includes the purchasing or the internal manufacturing of the product. Whereas the make or buy decision takes into account the decisions made regarding the external purchase or the internal manufacture of the product. So the factors to take into consideration is, what is the impact on time, cost, quality? Is there an ongoing need for a specific skill set? How steep is the learning curve? Are required resources readily available within the organization? The make or buy analysis can be made using one or more of the financial tools. And the financial tools includes the benefit cost analysis, the return on investment, the internal rate of return, and the net present value. We won't go into the actual formulas associated with these techniques, with these financial tools. That will be forthcoming. But do recognize that when the time comes for a make or buy analysis to be performed, these financial tools that I just read off or just communicated would be factors that can be used to help you make that decision to make or buy. Okay. The procurement statement of work, SOW, will describe the procurement item in sufficient detail to allow prospective sellers to determine if they are capable of providing the products, services, or results. Typically, that statement of work is distributed to potential vendors so that they can evaluate their capabilities to perform the work. It will serve as a basis to develop the procurement documents during the actual solicitation of the process. And it would also allow for a project scope baseline to be used to create the procurement. So what I'd like for you to take out of this is that before we can even begin reaching out to vendors or contacting potential entities that would be able to deliver the work, you need to have the procurement statement of work already drawn out so that that information will be the trigger point to be able to say what we are looking for from vendors and or contractors or third parties, however way you want to frame it. They need to have a statement of work, and that statement of work can then be dispersed to potential candidates that can actually perform the work. When we get into the after identifying the statement of work, then we're going to be looking at the development of the procurement management plan. Now remember, the procurement management plan is part of what? It's a component of what?
The project management plan.
Yes, absolutely. And with the procurement management plan, this component of the project or program management plan, it describes how a project team will acquire goods and services from outside of the performing organization. So you have to be clear. You got to be able to specify the types of contracts that will be used. You need to be able to describe the process for obtaining and evaluating bids. You need to take into account the mandates. The standardized procurement documents mandate that the standardized procurement documents that are being distributed must be used and describe how multiple providers will be managed. Now, even though you can describe all of this within the procurement management plan, this kind of sets the goal in terms of what you are looking to accomplish out of this before we get to the next step of selection criteria. So here you're taking into account, I have a project statement of a procurement statement of work with my project management, with my procurement management plan. I'm going to outline the specifics as to what needs to be included within the process of being able to define what's all required in order to acquire the goods and services from outside of the performing organization. And once you have that together, then it's time to be able to identify a set of attributes desired by the buyer. In this case, it would be you as the buyer, which a seller is required to meet or exceed in order for them to be selected for a contract. And some of the areas that would be addressed as part of that selection criteria would be overall or the life cycle cost. You know, does this selected seller produce the low total cost of ownership, which includes the purchase cost plus the operating cost? Understanding the needs, how well does that seller proposal address the procurement statement of work? Warranty, does the seller provide a warranty for the final product, and if so, for what duration? So you take into account, these are the sampling, or this is just a sample of the source selection criteria. But keep in mind, the reason why this criteria is being established is because you want to be able to find the correct entity that's going to allow you to receive the acquired goods and services that you expect in order to deliver the end solution. Qualified vendors. Not everyone is a qualified vendor, but qualified vendors are vendors approved to deliver products, services, or results based on the procurement requirements identified for a project. The list of qualified vendors can be created based on historical information about vendors. If the required resources are new to the organization, then of course you want to take it one step further in your investigation and conduct some market research that can help you identify whether or not the resources that you are targeting could be a good fit. Qualified vendors list. This is just a sample here. It's like once you get to that point where you have your statement of work, you've defined your procurement management plan, you've outlined specifically what you're looking for in your candidates, you've put together a selection criteria matrix to kind of help you identify where the strengths and perhaps the challenges may exist across the vendors. And then you come up with your qualified vendor list, which is going to contain details regarding vendors who meet the organization's requirement and to whom those requests can be sent. And sometimes it's known as an approved vendor list. Now, once you have that list, then you want to start taking into account the vendor conferences. Now, one thing, and you've probably heard of the term RFI, that is the request for information. Be familiar with that term. For each vendor is scrutinized and evaluated for qualifying vendors. And this is where you go out and you request information. And the term qualified vendors does not mean that the organization is bound to do business with them. It only indicates that when needed, the organization will interact with the vendors and request for proposals, or some people refer to it as an invitation for a bid or a request for a quote. Either way, they will all be sent to the qualified vendors. And then when you get to the point of conducting the bidder conferences, which are meetings conducted by the buyer after issuing an RFP, but is prior to submitting to the submissions of a bid. or a proposal by that vendor. So take into account the timing as to when things are occurring. The bidder conferences typically would take place after issuing an RFP, but prior to the submission of a bid or proposal by that vendor. The buyer explains the requirements, proposes the terms and the conditions, and the buyer clarifies the vendor's queries. The buyer ensures all prospective vendors have a clear and common understanding of the technical and contractual requirements of the procurement, and also the vendor conferences, pre-bid conferences, pre-proposal conferences, contract conferences, all are different terms, but they're all meaning the same thing. It's just taking into account that these meetings are going to be conducted after the RFP has been issued. The external resource requirements in these, this is another component that you're taking into account as you are going through the process of planning and managing procurement. Outsourcing is moving beyond the organization to secure resources, or I shouldn't say resources, but the expertise of certain skill set and the services that are not readily available within the immediate organization. So as part of that resource requirements need, you're taking into account whether or not that outside organization can be able to fulfill their obligations based on a contract or on a short-term basis. And it helps the businesses to focus more on their core competencies, and they're used frequently. Communication, as with anything, communication is a critical component of the procurement process due to the fact that there are so many people involved. The communication plan needs to include, or should include, provisions for working with vendors or suppliers, and this takes into account examples like periodic progress reports of supplier activities, advanced notifications of potential supplier cost overruns or schedule delays, formal acceptance by the project manager of suppliers' contracted deliverables. Okay, suppliers and contracts. Now, you know that a contract is a mutually binding agreement that obligates the seller to provide the specified project or service or result and obligates the buyer to pay for it. There are, when it comes to contracts, there are two types. You have, I shouldn't even say two types, it's actually three types. You have your fixed price, your cost reimbursable, and your time and material. First and foremost, fixed price contracts is an agreement that sets the fee that will be paid for a defined scope of work, regardless of the cost or effort to deliver it. And it's also referred to as the lump sum contract. And basically is establishing a total price for a product or service. And believe it or not, this type of contract actually gives the buyer the maximum protection. But it requires a long time, or it requires a great deal of time for preparing and evaluating. And with the fixed prices, with the fixed price contract, there are three types of fixed price contracts. The firm fixed price contract, and this is the type of fixed price contract where the buyer pays the seller a set amount regardless of the seller's cost, and is commonly used for those organizations that are looking to spend a certain amount for products and services, and that is regardless of a change in the scope of work. It's a fixed price. You have your fixed price incentive fee contract, and this is the type of contract where the buyer pays the seller a set amount, and the seller can earn an additional amount if the seller meets the defined performance criteria. And then the third type of fixed price contract is the fixed price with an economic price adjustment. And this takes into account, it's a fixed price contract, but it has a special provision allowing for predefined final adjustments to the contract price due to changed conditions such as inflation or cost increase for a specific type of raw material. With your cost reimbursement, this is the type of contract that's involving payments to the seller for the seller's actual cost, plus a fee, typically representing the seller's profit. With this one, there are 3 different types of cost reimbursable contract. You have your cost plus fixed fee, and that's a type of cost reimbursable contract where the buyer reimburses the seller for the seller's allowable cost. And the allowable costs are defined within the contract, plus a fixed amount for profit. So the seller receives a fixed fee payment, and then it's calculated based on the initial estimate of the project cost, and then there's a fixed fee that doesn't change just due to the seller's performance. You have a cost plus incentive fee, and this is the type of cost reimbursable contract where the buyer reimburses the seller for the seller's allowable cost per the contract, and the seller earns its profit if it meets the defined performance criteria. And then the last one is a cost plus award fee. And this is a category of contract that involves payments to the seller for all legitimate actual costs incurred for the completed work. Plus, they're awarded a fee, which is going to represent the seller profit. And then last but not least, you have your time and material. And this is the type of contract that is considered to be somewhat hybrid because it's taken into account the reimbursable costs and the fixed price contract. So the buyer pays the seller a negotiated hourly rate and pays in full reimbursements for materials used to complete the project. And then this contract can also be used for, let's say, staff augmentation. It could be based on the acquisition of experts or outside support, but the statement of work cannot be quickly changed. Components of a contract, I think we've all got a pretty good sense of what that entails. You got the description of the work being performed, the delivery date, other scheduling information, the indication of authority, responsibilities of both parties, management of technical business concepts, aspects, price and payment terms, provisions for termination, applicable guarantees and warranties. If anything, the type of question that you may potentially receive on the test may ask you for the components of a contract, if price and payment terms are omitted, is it an official contract? I'll let you make that judgment. And we talked about the contract types, which were the fixed price, cost reimbursable, and time and material. The delivery solution, we've already kind of touched on that. Delivering the solution is really just taking into account, are we getting the procured goods and services that we anticipated by the supplier in accordance to the procurement management plan? And in order to be able to say that our solution has been delivered, you're going to be looking at certain aspects of the certain phases of the solution delivery, and you need to be familiar with those phases. So for example, if the solution delivery phase, if you were at the point in which a solution has been transferred to customer support, then what phase of the solution delivery phase are you in? You're in support and maintenance. If it turns out to be that the phase of the solution involves detailed design, based on the description of that solution needs to be documented. If you're in the testing phase, then the solution is being tested. If you're in the training phase, the training is being provided to the customer, and so forth. So the point here is that the goal of the procurement is the delivery of the procured goods, but then you have to ask yourself, well, when you get the delivery of that particular solution, what phase are you actually, what phase of the solution delivery are you in? And on the exam, it may give you an example of the type of scenario or description of a particular phase, and it would be up to you to be able to identify what phase that it is. Okay. All righty. The control procurement process, in accordance to the PMBOK, the process of managing procurement relationships, monitoring contract performance, making changes and corrections as appropriate, and closing out the contract. You know, one thing to take into account as part of the control procurement process is that change is inevitable. And when the changes do occur, it's important to be able to ensure that the project plan is executed in accordance to what has been actually defined in the seller's work to begin with. Performance reporting to monitor the seller cost, schedule, and technical performance. Once again, this is all part of the control process to ensure that they're not overspending, or perhaps they're using below par technical expertise or below par technical equipment. Quality control to ensure that the quality of the seller's service or product meets the contract objectives. Change control to ensure that changes to the contract are carefully managed and properly approved. Monitor and control the project risks to ensure that the risks are properly managed. This is what the control procurement process will entail. The contract change control system, that is the system used to collect, track, adjudicate, and communicate changes to a contract. It may or may not be a component of the integrated change control system. It may just be a separate system altogether. But just do note that it's a possibility that this portion of the this particular system, if you will, could potentially reside within the integration control, change control system. It's specifically dedicated to control contract changes. It specifies the process by which project contract changes can be made, and it includes documentation, dispute resolution process, and approval levels to authorize the changes to contract specifications. So if you are in a situation where someone approaches you wanting to issue a change to a particular product detail. Let's say, for example, you were actually developing a new pair of jeans, and the jeans had a unique design associated with it on the back pocket. And now all of a sudden, your vendor wants to issue a change to use, instead of the design appearing on the back pocket, he wants to make a change to have the design appear on the front pocket. So if that is the case, then what is that process for which you get those changes submitted? How can they be made? Suppose the change that's being requested goes against the overall project itself. This is all part of what is going to be included as part of the contract change control system. Okay, guys, I'm gonna try to wrap this up as quickly as possible. I went over just a tad bit, but I do want you to take into account types of contract changes. Do read up on this part here, understanding the differences between administrative changes versus contract modification, supplemental agreement, constructive changes, and termination of contract. The legal concepts when managing disputes, understand the legal ramifications for when there is a warranty involved or a waiver involved, a breach of contract, or cease and desist. Guidelines for handling dispute, having a good understanding of the differences between the legal term, that is what you can and cannot do, and have a significant, which may have a significant impact on the project. And this is where, going back to the original list, knowing what warranty, what are the legal ramifications associated with a warranty, waiver, breach of contract, or cease and desist. Okay, be sure that you consult with somebody in the company's legal department when you do run across such disputes. And if your contract isn't written specifically to exclude inadvertent waivers, avoid doing any of the following that will waive your contract rights. And that is, accept a product that fails to meet standards for quality or performance, accept late deliveries, overlook an aspect of nonconformance to the contractual obligations. Closing procurements, typically supported by a written notification that is provided from the buyer to the seller once the contract is complete. It is usually documented in terms and conditions that were specified in the original contract and the procurement management plan, and the procurement can be closed at any time throughout the life of the project, not necessarily at the end of the project. Then we have further discussions with regards, or further guidelines associated with closing the procurements. And this is taken into account, you know, not only do you want to ensure that the required product that's being delivered to you by the seller is what you expected, but it also meets all of the quality standards that was earlier defined. You make sure that any buyer furnished property or information has been returned to the buyer, settle any outstanding contracting issues, conduct a procurement audit to identify the successes and failures, address any outstanding invoices and payments, archive the complete contract file, provide the seller with formal written notice that the contract has been completed, communicate all procurements are closed, and update the OPA documents as needed. There's a lot of steps that you take before you actually close out a procurement, but they're all really good, effective steps to follow just to ensure that once a project is closed, it is closed, and therefore no additional funding, no additional work beyond that close date can continue. And then for managing the suppliers and contracts, here are additional guidelines. And this is also covered in your PMBOK, but just to kind of give you a little bit of background or a little bit of insight, the closing of the, the managing of the suppliers, regardless of the project size, the project manager is responsible for administering procurements for the project. Experienced project managers always rely heavily on the contract administration expertise of their organization's procurement, purchasing, and legal departments. Effective procurement control ensures that the seller's performance meets the contractual requirements and objectives. So please take into account those guidelines. There are several, but the ones that are listed here kind of gives you a little bit of insight on how to best manage the suppliers and the contract. Index and store all contract correspondence for ease of retrieval. Develop and implement an effective contract change control system. Evaluate the risk of each contract change that request. Document all contract changes and incorporate any effects of the changes into the project plan. Develop and implement an effective performance reporting system for the seller. In the contract, specify any performance reporting specifications to be imposed on the seller. Set performance milestones to monitor project progress. If the work is performed at another site, conduct site visits. Submit approval invoices for payment in accordance to the contract. So we have actually reached the end of this section, and it wouldn't be right if I didn't ask you just a couple of questions because it was just so quiet on the line. So I just want to make sure you're still listening. You would need 6 professional security guards for 4 hours during the evening of the public meeting. What contractual considerations are important as you select the security firm who will provide the guards? What are you going to take into account? Name 2. Let me ask you this. Is this a term contract?
Yes.
Yes, it is. And why is it term?
Actually, it was Bill, but when you're dealing with that particular one, it's a term one because it only lasts for a certain amount of time.
Absolutely. Good job. A good job. And last but not least, is this a fixed price contract?
No, wouldn't it be time and materials since they would be their hours would be translated to how long they'd be securing the building?
No.
Or wouldn't it be like the labor hours?
Well, this is Bill. Can I answer that?
Yeah, you can.
So, in dealing with security firms, I know that we've always done the fixed price because of overtime requirements and everything. So, we've always done fixed price in a term contract with the security professionals. So, I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's basically what we did with them.
Well, the question is the contractual considerations that are most important as you select the security firm. Well, term contract is definitely it because it's only for a short period of time. And with it being for a short period of time and a specific set of hours,
right,
it would be part of a fixed price contract. Okay, you will rent 3 large monitors so meeting attendees can see the speakers. Which of the following documents should you prepare first in order to procure the monitors? Is it the procurement statement of work, the procurement management plan, contract, or teaming agreement? What's the first thing
Okay.
you need to do before you procure those monitors?
The second one. The
Procurement
management plan.
procurement management plan? Actually, it is the procurement statement of work. Remember earlier when I was going through our topics here, and I mentioned that before we can do anything, we have to have a statement of work. Okay. All righty. Now, I'm going to ask you this. The contract to rent the monitors stipulates that you should inspect them before the meeting. You are in a hurry and forget to do this. And as the meeting begins, one of the monitors do not work. Which of the following is the correct term for this situation? Is it a warrant? Is it a waiver or a negotiated settlement? The contract to rent the monitor stipulates that you should inspect them before the meeting, but you're in a hurry and you forget to do this. And the meeting begins where one of the monitors does not work. What have you just done? What is this particular, which of the following is the correct term for this situation?
Warranty.
Try again.
Stipulation, like a stipulation or some type, the one you mentioned with the stipulation.
It is actually waiver. It's waiver. Think about that one. The waiver takes into account this was a stipulation that you had when you got the monitors, and instead of you inspecting it before your meeting began, you proceeded and ran the meeting, not realizing that the monitors was not working, and that was because you gave up your right, which was your contractual right, and inadvertently kind of suffered in the end because you didn't have an extra monitor. Okay, guys. All right. So last but not least, your public meeting requires approximately 5,000 square feet of space. Which of the following selection criteria are most important? Is it past performance of company that owns the space? The size of the company that owns the space? Warranty? References from previous renters? Or the use of two smaller rooms if one large room is not available? Which two criteria are most important when you're looking to have a public
I
meeting?
would think historical, the references.
Yes, that is important. One more.
Past performance?
Yes, past performance.
Performance here.
Okay, guys, we have come to the end of our session of starting the project, part 4. And I am going to stop the recording.